right. We are. Shabbat Shalom again. So today's Torah portion, we are in the 8th Torah portion in the ancient Palestinian cycle. Some call it the Palestinian Torah cycle. Others call it the ancient Triennial cycle. It's exciting for me. I hope it has been for you, as every time we've got something new. We discover a new Torah portion. For those of us who grew up on or are used to the annual cycle, which was a later development in Judaism. Now we have this wonderful, nice-paced triennial cycle. And it's amazing, even with the triennial cycle, I can kind of see why it's twice in the Shemitah year. Shemitah cycle, I mean. Why we get through it twice every 7 years, because you really can't even get through the whole thing. If we spend just, say, an hour and a half, or hour 45 minutes talking about it, that's maybe half, right? So it's still, there's so much treasure in there. So many treasures. So let's just start with a quick prayer. Our Father and our God, we're so grateful to you. Thank you for everyone who is here today and everyone who will be coming in soon. Please, may it be your will that there be no technical issues, that we have open communication, that everyone's heart is right, that we are being Shabbatistic today, that we are keeping the Sabbath in the way that you desire. We ask you, please, to touch us all with your Holy Spirit, that we might come together and learn from one another, not just me teaching what I discovered, but that we can have a nice back and forth and wrestle with the Scriptures, which is really, in my understanding, what it means to be Israel, to wrestle with the divine, and certainly your word. וגם לעמוד לפניך אדוני, תשלח נא את רוח הקודש עלינו אדוני, בזכות ישוע. Amen. All right. So here we are. The Torah portion is interesting. We have another new name. Okay? So it's called vayihyu B'nei Noach. And this can mean certain things, right? And actually I put exited because that's coming up in the Torah portion. That's not really what this means. If you just took this by itself. By itself this would mean and they were the sons of Noach, or and the sons of Noach became, right? Or then the sons of Noach became, or then they began, and then we have another verb coming up in the Torah portion, like exited or something like this, right? All right, please feel free. Any visitors, welcome. We use the chat for questions and answers, so just keep your microphones off, and you can use the chat box to type a question or a comment to me. Any comment is welcome for the most part. Don't worry, it doesn't distract me when you write in the in-session chat, and I'll just get to it as I can. Yeah? You can also send a private question by not selecting everyone. Select just to the presenter or organizers, and then I won't give away your identity when I ask the question. All right? Read the question. The Torah portion today, of course, we're still in Genesis, and we will be for quite a while. We are in Genesis chapter 9, verse 18, through chapter 10, verse 32. And the Haftarah starts in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 9 and onward. Okay? Everybody got that? Oh yeah, thanks for noticing the vineyard, Tet. It is beautiful, isn't it? Yeah. So I figured that would be an appropriate background, since in this week's Torah portion, Noach plants a vineyard, which means he had quite some agricultural skill to be able to plant the grapes and also to make wine from them. So here is the photo that I'm kind of making it a new tradition of ours to look at the ancient Masorah. So this is, again, the Westminster Leningrad Codex. This scroll is over 1,000 years old, and it's actually not a scroll, it's a codex, which means it's kind of an early attempt at a book, right? So you have pages. And in the codex, you can see we have all the vowel pointings, we have all of the ta'amim, the accent markers, and so that's just very exciting. Here we even have a Rafe, and we have some various notes from the Masoretes on the sides. And you can see, if you look, here we have the Samech, and it's got a crown, like last week's one had a little simple crown, showing where the Torah portion starts. So again, if you're new to the triennial cycle, this is not something which people just invented ad hoc in the last century, but this is something that is more ancient than the usual annual reading. And here you can see the marker of the Sedra, of the Torah reading, right here. And here it is. You can see we've got vayihyu livnei Noach hayotzeim. So there it is, when they went out. Right? Min hativa, from the ark. So that's why I was saying they began to exit, right? But really the Torah portion doesn't have this name in it, the hayotzeim. That's the next verb. All right, any questions here? You can see there's some places where it started to fade, something happened, but you're looking at ink that is a millennium old, so it's quite amazing that it's as intact as it is. All right, and I just want to make a quick announcement before, in case I forget later. We have a brand new Hebrew class for new students who don't know how to read even, but it's not just a reading class, that's the first part of it. We will, B'ezrat Hashem, be starting this on Philippine time zone, so GMT plus 8, same as Singapore, I believe, and some others. So this will be Tuesday nights at 8:45 p.m. Oh, I'm sorry, that is totally wrong. Wait. 9:45 p.m. 9:45 p.m. So it's a kind of a late night class. That's when we'll start, and we will probably go to 11 p.m. All right. So part of the reason for the late night is we're trying to sync up with a few of our American students or students based in the United States. So it makes it kind of hard, right, to sync up. So this is about as late as I can ask our Filipino students to go. So if you were in a class before, the Monday class, which started with 50 people and dwindled down to 7, we're going to reset that class. And with this class, the difference is this one will have, we are doing the half-shekhel principle, right? So what this means is, just like in ancient times, everyone had to give a half-shekhel, the poor and the wealthy alike. And so there's a base fee for the class, and a hope of that people will be able to give love gifts as they feel appropriate with the class. But the only thing you have to pay is the base fee. And the reason is, it's ridiculous to go from 50 people in a class to 7. I'm sorry, right? So what I'm hoping to do is studies have shown that if someone spends something on their education, they are more likely to follow through with it. If it's someone else's money, maybe not. But if they spend their own money on it, then they're very likely to follow through. I used to do this myself when I was at the university. I would audit a class that I was interested in, which meant it still came out of the tuition, but that kind of forced me to go through with it, even though you didn't have to do the homework since you're just auditing. Like I audited Aramaic class one time, right? So the idea is, I can, if I don't have time for the homework, I don't have to do it, but at least there's the rationale to finish up with it, right? To go through with it, because supposedly it costs something. And it's fairly minimal, so everybody should be able to handle that. Hope it's okay. But you can ask offline about that and how that works. And yeah, so let's hold on, my light turned off here. I hope you guys will take advantage. I'm not sure how many more times I'll start from the beginning. I don't particularly enjoy teaching reading, so I like to teach some more advanced stuff. So this may be the last time for some time that I will teach from the beginning level. Bereshit, we call it the Bereshit class, biblical Hebrew. So try to take advantage if you can. We're probably going to start this Tuesday. It depends on signups, okay? All right. We'll be using the same address you used to get in here today, at least for a while. Oh, yeah, one other comment about the half-shekel. The half-shekel payments for the class, these go to my various Tikkun Olam projects, right? So this is not going to feed the rabbi, for example. This is going to it will go to 3 various areas. One is providing medication for the elderly who cannot afford it here in the Philippines. And the other project is helping poor children to attend school. I don't know how many of you know this. I'm sure you pretty much know it if you live in the Philippines. But very often, even though the education system is supposedly free, children might not be able to afford to get to school, right? Like just taking the tricycle to get to the school, or the walk might be too far, or perhaps the parents need them to work selling food on the streets or something like this. And that's how one of the families that we help with education, I met the kids selling ube something on the street, right? And the kid should be in elementary school, but they couldn't afford it. They can't afford to get the kid there. They can't afford the loss from him not selling anymore. And so that's part of one of the Tikkun projects, is to help children like this to be able to have an education. And even those who attend school, there's costs for projects, right? Project materials. I've met a lot of people that they had a problem. They maybe attended school, but they had to dig through the trash to get materials every time there's a project assigned, right? And so, of course, often the teachers are not sensitive to this, and so they don't get as good as a grade as the rich kid did, or the kid who can at least afford to buy poster board and cardboard, and, the cutouts and glitter or whatever is involved in the project. So that's one of the Tikkun Olam projects. And the third one, the third one is helping pusapins. These are Filipino cats, or pusakal, people like to call them, but I prefer to call them pusapins, as I was taught by one of the workers at Pause. There's a nonprofit shelter here. So we like to feed, provide food, and sometimes medical care for these animals. As we've been learning in the Torah portion, we are part of this world, and the covenant which God made with Noah was not just with Noah. It was with all kol hachaya, all of the life forms, all of the animals. And so Hashem has pity on his creatures, and as his gardeners, we are also supposed to have pity on the creatures. And so why cats? Well, it seems most Filipinos have an affinity for dogs, and so they might leave the cats neglected. So we'll hope that someone else pulls up the slack on the dogs. All right, so let's get started. Here we are in Genesis chapter 9, verse 18 and 19. You see on the screen? Let's get into these. And it says, vayihyu b'nei Noach hayotzeim min hateva Shem v'cham vayafet. Okay, vayafeth, we probably should say. So then the sons of Noach began exiting. Yatsa, we know Yatsa, to go out. They began exiting from the ark. And here we have in gray, these are the proper names: Shem and Cham and Yafeth. Usually it's Yafeth. Here it changes to Yafeth because of some stuff on how it works when you sing the verse. Excuse me. V'cham hu avi Canaan. And now Cham, he was the father of Canaan, Canaan. So there's a lot packed in there. You see all my colored bubbles on there? Those are each from different commentators I want to invoke as we discuss this. So let's look at this, the full phrase. Now Cham, he was the father of Canaan. So what's happening here? So here I'm going to read to you from the sage Ibn Ezra. And he writes, this teaches that both Cham and Canaan were wicked. And as the father does, so do the children, often. Canaan and not Cush. Cush was Cham's firstborn. Genesis chapter 10, verse 6. Now, let me interrupt Ibn Ezra there. Sorry, Ibn Ezra. No problem. All right. I want to interrupt for a second. I thought this was very interesting because a Cushite, this is someone from what used to be Nubia, or modern-day Ethiopia, covers most of the region. And this is, of course, where Moses' second wife is from, right? We're told that she was a Cushite. Remember, that's why his sister gets in trouble for Lashon Hara. She's mad that he took another wife and all that stuff. And it's interesting because the Bible, compared to other works of antiquity, and especially compared to other religious works, is not a racist book. I mean, it's kind of amazing for the time. If you read the Bible, I mean, okay, look, Jews versus everyone who's not a Jew? Maybe. Maybe you could say, all right, if you picked like those who are Hebrews and those who are not, then maybe definitely there's animosity for the non-Hebrews, right? As a group, right? All the way from China to Africa and up into Northern Europe, all of them were considered one thing. But that wasn't because of their ethnicity. This was because of their religions, because they were pagans. They worshipped water, they worship the sea, they worship gods. And this is even, I have a friend, an online friend from a solar community who is in Thailand. He's a European fellow. and his wife is Thai, and he was telling me that today, or maybe it started yesterday, they have some special holiday there where they make these. Have you ever seen the Chinese candle-powered balloons? Right, like the flame produces heat, and it makes a very light balloon item go up into the air. It's really beautiful. A Goyist, right? Yehoshua says Goyist, not racist, but Goyist. Yeah, the Bible's probably Goyist, right? Against the goyim, right? And remember last time I told you guys, or maybe it was 2 times ago, I shared with you the nuance of goy, the way that it's used in Tanakh versus how it's used in the apostolic writings, right? You have to understand, many Hebrew words, they have a nuance one way or a nuance the other way, right? And so goy can just mean nation, but it can also mean non-Jew, i.e. non-son or daughter of Israel. And so in biblical times, since that meant pagan, there's a lot of animosity towards someone while they're still a pagan. The thing is, they could stop being a pagan. I don't know if you guys remember this or not. I think it's out on the Hebrew Literacy channel. If you check out the Hebrew Literacy under Lekach Psalms Deep Learning, I think we have Psalm 16 out there. And Psalm 16 is quite amazing because it has vast linguistic evidence that it was written by a Canaanite, right? Which means that you don't have to remain a goy. Goy, it's not just about race, right? It's not just about ethnicity. It would start that way because the children's teeth were set on edge. When a person was born into a certain society, still today, they are at an advantage or they're at a disadvantage. If you're born in Israel today, that's an advantage for you. Even if your parents aren't Jews, even if you're not part of the Jewish faith, it's still an advantage because you are surrounded by kashrut. All the grocery stores, they don't carry anything that's unclean. You have to look for a little tiny Russian hole-in-the-wall grocery store if you want to find pork, for example, right? Or you might have to find I remember in Haifa there was a little Filipino store, but it was kind of like underground. It's like a basement that had been converted into a grocery store for the expat Filipino workers there, the OFW workers, right? So maybe you could find shrimp there. I don't know. I didn't see it when I went there. I saw bongos though. And so, so there's most of the society is doing a lot of things that are correct with the way that God had planned his law for humanity. And so being born in a culture which is automatically keeping Sabbath, things are closed on Shabbat, for example, right? In Jerusalem, the buses don't even run on Shabbat, right? So this sort of thing, there's an advantage to that. And this is what people oftentimes get confused about when Rav Shaul or the Apostle Paul, he's talking about what advantages there of this, right? Or he's talking about basically the advantage of being from the society which is not pagan, right? And so anyway, this friend of mine in Thailand, he was all excited. He grew up Catholic, although non-practicing, right? Like many Catholics are, and his wife is a Buddhist. And he was explaining to me about this holiday. They have, they do those little candles that fly up into the air, the Chinese thing, very cool. But he says that a lot of Thai, they thank, like it was the river spirit or something like that. And he was telling me yesterday how his wife was so grateful to water, was so grateful to the river and to water because life comes from that. And I had one of those moments where, it's uncomfortable because you have to correct someone. But they're not of the same faith as we are, right? But still, so there's a chance the person's going to get angry or offended or whatever. So I went ahead and shared with him. I said, look, that's interesting. It's so different from the Judeo-Christian ethic, from the biblical teaching. We've been studying Genesis lately, and we've been finding that a lot of the stories in Genesis, they exist in other cultures also, right? The flood one, for example, right? We talked about Unatpishtim and, Gilgamesh and these other stories that have a flood story in them similar to the Bible's, but that the difference is in those stories, nature oftentimes is worshipped or feared. Even the gods in one of the stories, they feared the flood, the chaotic forces that they had released. They themselves became fearful. There's this, one of the stories you've got Ashteroth, or Ashteroth. She's crying, she's weeping because she's scared about the flood, right? Things like this. This was the ancient world's perspective, that nature in and of itself was often to be worshipped. In Egypt, they worshipped the Nile, right? The Nile, it was a god that gave them sustenance, and they worshipped the sun, right? Which is where really all life is supported, if you think about it, from photosynthesis. So anyway, I didn't share all those details, but I shared to him that the Bible is different in that it has those stories too, with the correct take on it, of course. But it's an attack against that other way of thinking, that the God of the Bible does not like it when people thank the river, for example, right? When they give gifts to a river spirit or to the river or something. And it seemed to me that that's also incompatible with Buddhism. Like, you would think that the focus should be that the river is an illusion. It's not even there, right? So anyway, so I kind of passed it. He didn't get angry, Baruch Hashem. And it just, a lot of it reminded me of things that we're encountering today. So here when Ibn Ezra, when he talks about Cush was not one of the children who were cursed, right? This is very interesting to me. In fact, it's probably why Noach did not curse Cham, but he curses Cham's son instead. One of the reasons. Because some of his sons were not sinners. For example, Cush. And this is another great example. It's very subtle. You might not have noticed it, but slowing down, smelling the roses, right? Looking at the text, letting it wash over us, maybe reading it several times in the week, looking at the commentators, you can start to see some of these things. Yehoshua put Goy lives matter. You mean loves? Loves maybe? GLM, right? GLM. Okay, so but look. So the thing that's interesting to me is the Cushite. In modern Hebrew, kushi, it's considered a pejorative term, right? You're not supposed to say it. It's amazing how languages change over time. It's kind of like saying the N-word in English, in modern Hebrew. But not in the Bible. In the Bible, there's not the racism, right? I mean, you look at if you've read the Song of Psalms, which I read with my Noach group recently, we were reading through this in the Hebrew, and it's beautiful language, and one of the lovers is dark skinned, and there's no it's like an advantage for the lover. Like it's seen as, oh wow. Not to say that dark is better than white or anything like that, but the point is, the Bible itself, written over centuries and centuries, is not racist. If you'll remember, in the apostolic writings, we have a Ethiopian, that's a Cushite, in a chariot reading from the scroll, the Sefer of Isaiah. And he's confused, right? And Philip shows up, the Spirit brings him, and he says, what are you reading? And he says, oh, Isaiah, but I can't understand anything. Which is actually super awesome, because if you've ever read Isaiah in Hebrew, let's say you know Torah Hebrew, and you've read it in biblical Hebrew, you'll realize it's extremely difficult. The language is extremely difficult. The metaphors are difficult. The way it's arranged, some of the prophecies are even difficult, even when you get all the words. Like Yehoshua and I, we've been discussing a lot about some of the messianic prophecies. And just finding out how these things were fulfilled originally in the first round can be difficult sometimes. So I love it. The Bible's just so realistic. It's true. It's difficult. And then Philip explains to him, one of the prophecies, and then he's gone, right? The Spirit takes him away. And so you've got Moses marries a Cushite. You've got a Cushite, that's in the early part in the Torah, and then later in the apostolic writings we have a Cushite who's an educated man, and he's reading from the Torah, and there's no racism against this man. It's just listed as a thing. Here's this guy, he's an Ethiopian, and he's, probably an Ethiopian Jew, right? So that's really what the focus is. Is someone a son or daughter of Israel, or are they not? And so here we see Ibn Ezra notices Cush was not cursed, which from his time is also amazing. Ibn Ezra, he's from an Arabic-speaking country. That's why his name is Ibn, right, from Arabic, instead of Ben. We would have expected Ben Ezra, but instead he's Ibn Ezra, right, like Arabic. So he's son of Ezra. And so, but even with that time period when there was great racism in the world, he still points out, oh, notice Cush. I mean, it would have been very tempting to just say, oh, yeah, look, all the Africans are cursed, see? They're all from Canaan and la, because we believe the Egyptians are from Canaan, etc. But he doesn't. He points out that Cush is not. Dan says Cush was, okay, I'm not going to read that one. Yehoshua says, the Torah teaches the Jewish people to be kind to the stranger amongst them. In other words, not to be xenophobic. Exactly, that's a great point. That even goes beyond what I'm saying. Yehoshua's point is that not only is the Bible not racist, which is so crazy because in the United States, I remember I had a personal trainer before, and he was a black Muslim man, right? And I would talk to him about the Quran from time to time. And I asked him what drew him to the Quran. He said, well, that Islam was not the white man's religion, right? So, I mean, he was honest at least. So the idea was that like somehow the Bible is a white man's religion, which is just insane. Was it Europeans who wrote the Bible? Every writer, Old and New Testament, they're all Jews, right? So it just doesn't even make any kind of sense. Yeah, it's ignorant. I agree, it's ignorant, right? In fact, that religion is extremely racist towards blacks, especially if you read. There's lots of stuff in the Hadith, the authentic Hadiths. About there's a story about like the blacks come from the left shoulder of Adam, and the whites come from the right shoulder, and the whites will go to heaven, and Allah doesn't care, and the blacks will go to hell, and Allah doesn't care, right? So there's and that the man who Allah hates most is a black man, and there's just all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So the ignorance, the way the Nachash, he tricks people to end up in a religion where they're actually hated for their color versus being in the one true faith where God doesn't look at the skin of a person. Of course, he sees the heart, he sees the mind. He doesn't even look if the person is attractive or not. He doesn't see man the way that this is. Remember, God tells us to the prophet Shemuel when he's looking at David. David is kind of the runt of the litter. Really, this one, this red-headed freak. This is the one who's supposed to be the king of Israel. And God reminds the prophet that God does not see people the way that people see people. Right, Yehoshua mentions that the prophet of the religion of peace, that he had black slaves. And one of them is quite prominent in the religion, and he wasn't freed even after Muhammad died. He was inherited by someone else. And so, this concept of ever freeing slaves, you really only find this in the scriptures, in the Torah. Right? Even the concept of having a limit on servitude. Yes, and Muslims have always been involved in trading black slaves. Exactly. So it's just insane that in the States, a lot of our citizens who are members of that faith, they were fooled into this idea that is the faith for so-called colored people, whereas the Bible is the white man's religion, and it's just hyper ignorant. So here we have this beautiful example. Ibn Ezra, even coming from an Islamic country, even having Arabic as his native language, and he later moved to Europe, but Ibn Ezra, he is not affected by this racism because he has the Torah, he has the word, he understands it's not about race, it's not about ethnicity, it's about either being born into or choosing to join the people of God, to join his nation, the B'nei Yisrael. And so he points out that Canaan and not Cush. Cush was even Ham's firstborn, and he is not cursed. Thus, he, rather than Canaan, the youngest, should have been mentioned in this verse. The younger is mentioned in this verse because Canaan was going to be cursed. The chapter telling of what Canaan did and that Noach cursed him was written to inform us that all Canaanites, both male and female, bear a curse from the time of Noach. Abraham thus commanded his servant, "You shall not take a wife for my son of the daughters of the Canaanites," in Genesis chapter 24, verse 3. Right, Yehoshua points out that really in the Bible we mostly have indentured servitude, right? Not so much slavery being rampant. Rebecca similarly said, "If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Cheth, what good shall my life do me?" Genesis 27, verse 46. Should someone ask, what sins were the Hittites guilty of? Let him open his eyes. You gotta love Ibn Ezra. You kind of see him as like this, I know he's like this rickety old guy that's going to slap you in the face for asking a dumb question. The Hittites and the Amorites and the others are all descendants of Canaan. That's Ibn Ezra. And of course, they all were idolaters, which is why they had to be expelled from the land and not allowed to coexist with us, to seduce us into going after their gods. Okay, any other comments or questions on these verses or what we discussed or something new? All right, Yofi, let me see here. Okay, good. Nice turnout right now. That's good. I didn't want to wait as long as last time because sometimes, we find some interesting stuff to talk about and then we're restricted because we waited so late to start. So, Sforno comments on this, Hu Avi Canaan, he was the father of Canaan. Canaan, infamous for his wickedness, and Cham was similar in character. Thus he was the father of Canaan in the spiritual as well as the biological sense, right? The spiritual father. Like I oftentimes talk about Protestantism, that their spiritual father was the wicked Martin Luther, the murderous, perverted person that he was, and also some of the other leaders of the Protestant Reformation who were also very, very wicked. So sometimes, I interact on forums online and I do debates with people sometimes, and whenever I run across anti-Semites, Protestants or anti-Semites, it's interesting. Usually they think Jacob was wicked, right? That our father, Jacob, was a wicked man until he had his conversion experience, right? Until he wrestled with the angel. And then after that, his name changed to Israel and all is good, right? Again, just linguistically ignorant, biblically ignorant, culturally ignorant, but the hatred is there. And I remember telling one time to some family members, I'm having this debate with one of these people, and others are chiming in. I'm like, wow, he's so ticked off at this idea that Jacob was righteous and that Esau's wicked, right? And I said, I know why. It's because Luther is his father. And so I kind of did a little experiment. I said something about Luther, right, about how wicked he was, what a murderer he was, and boy, the guy flew off the handle. I was so right. It's his father. And then one of the people in the chat, they even chimed in. Why would you get mad when we say something about your father? Why would you say something bad about our father? He even referred to Luther, Yamach Shemo, as his father. So there is a spiritual tradition that is passed down through teachings that is beyond just being passed down by biology. This is why oftentimes Jewish literature will the students will refer to someone as their father who is their teacher, right, as their teacher. This also happens in the Greek schools as well. They would refer to like a great philosopher who had taught them, they would call him their father. So what about this Avi, my father? Chizkuni comments that he is singled out for mention. This is Canaan. As he was conceived while his parents were still in the ark. He was born immediately after his parents left the ark. Do you remember what we taught as the tradition and reasons for certain? They entered into the ark separate from their wives. They came out with their wives. You remember there are many opinions who agree with this, that for the humans, that sex on the ark was prohibited, right? So that there would be a year of no sexual relations as the earth is being purified, as all of the creation is being purified. But here we see this tradition that Chizkuni is talking about, that Cham did not obey this edict, that he actually conceived Canaan while on the ark. Yehoshua comments, what's the modern rabbinic view on the rules around servitude applying nowadays? That is very interesting. A lot has changed in Jewish culture since the diaspora was a real thing, right? So for the most part, servitude ended pretty early. And the reason it's derived to pikuach nefesh, right? Jews were treated very badly by Europeans, also by Arabs, and basically wherever we were mistreated, right? As the prophecy said, your name will be a bygone and a curse, and this all happened. And so the rabbis responded in forbidding certain actions so that the Gentiles would not be jealous, right? So for example, Jewish women are not supposed to wear gaudy jewelry, like they're not supposed to show off gold and precious metals, except on Shabbat. It's permitted on Shabbat, right? So the idea is so that the Gentiles do not see you and become jealous, like you don't attract the evil eye of the Gentiles, and a pogrom happens to steal all our jewelry, right? Or Jewish men don't even wear jewelry usually, right? Not even a wedding ring, right? This is for the religious. This is the tradition. Although there's other reasons for that. Some say it's because the golden calf, that it was the women who refused to give their jewelry, and that was Aaron's strategy by asking them. He knew they wouldn't want to give it up, but the men did, right? So there's some say that that's why. It's really unknown why Jewish men don't wear jewelry, but it might be related also to this not attracting the ire of the goyim, of the Gentiles. Even the German Jews, there was a 1,000-year ban on polygamy, for example, right? Rabbi Gershom, for 1,000 years, he said you should not take more than one wife because the Gentiles will see it and they'll be jealous and it'll cause violence on Jewish people. So there are many things in modern Jewish perspectives, like what you're asking about Yehoshua, which, right, that's right, that ban expired, right? But which many things in modern Jewish perspective, which are a result of the times. It's their rabbinical tachinot on behavior in order to protect the community, right? We don't want people to be so jealous of us. Because God, he keeps his promises. We have been made the head and not the tail in many instances. Many Jews are very wealthy. Many are successful. Many have invented many things. Many have risen very high in government, etc., etc. And so why add fuel to the fire? Already people have their stories about Jews controlling the World Bank and all this stuff. And so our sages, they act to protect us. So it's a good question about slavery. I don't know for sure, but my inkling is that, for one thing, you never hear of a Jew having a slave today, right? My inkling is that in the modern era, it would be frowned upon because of how the Gentiles would treat us, right? But really, if you have like a live-in maid, for example, how is that different from an ancient indentured servant, right? They live with you, you give them their food, right? Maybe you help out with their children, etc., that kind of thing. So I think it's largely just nomenclature. It's just the terms that we use today, right? Like we wouldn't say someone is an avid, right? An avid, it can mean both slave or it can mean servant, right? And so the terms have evolved. We use nicer language for it today when really the person understands. They live with you, they work for you, etc., etc. Yeah, that's correct. Yehoshua asked the rules of servitude, releasing them in the 7 years and all that stuff in the Torah, it only applies to Jews. That's correct, not to a Canaanite slave, for example. Yeah, but a Canaanite could change his religion. He could become Jewish, right? He could see that that's the real way. And so if he converted and became a son or daughter of Israel, then those rules would apply to him. The Torah perspective is kind of like you're keeping them from idolatry, which will destroy them for eternity, right? Because obviously a Canaanite slave living in a Jewish house was not allowed to have his idols, right? He's not allowed to be putting up Asherah poles. He's not allowed to be doing all this stuff. And so he's learning the way of righteousness in an era where most people were illiterate. So it's hard to see from today's portal of what is right and wrong, right? Like slavery is wrong. Oh, how could you? Why is it that the Jew is only for 7 years and the non-Jew is for his whole life? Well, it's keeping him from death. You're really saving his life is kind of the idea behind it, right? And again, if he changed and became a Jew, if he joined us, then okay, then that's a different rule. We don't have to worry about him going and practicing idolatry. And actually, it's beyond this. I do remember reading from the sages on this, reading something in the Talmud about it. I think it's in Kitlubot. I could be wrong on that, but anyway, it was saying that what I read about this was saying that the reason why the Canaanites, if they were enslaved, it was for their whole lives. It was not so much just to save them and protect them, but because they lived in the land, right? And God gives us the reason for driving them out, so that they do not entice Israel with their idolatry. And so once you've captured him and you can't trust him to not be an idolater if you release him back to his people. For sure he'll be influenced by them. So instead of executing them, the mercy is to let them be a slave, right? Let them be a slave or servant rather in the Jewish household. Yeah. And he could even, if it's a woman, she could even be given as a wife to one of the Jewish slaves we see, right? There's a situation where this can happen. Yeah. Okay, good questions, nice comments. Let's continue. Verse 19. Shloshai b'nei Noach. These are the 3 sons of Noach. U'me'elei nafetza chol haaretz. And from these ones dispersed all around all of the earth, even though all of the earth was dispersed is really what it's saying, but it means they populated the whole planet. This, of course, would be a shot across the bow of those who believe that the flood was not a global event, right?